My manager called me to his office on a bright Tuesday morning. I could tell by the way he avoided eye contact that something was off. "Eleanor, please have a seat," Martin said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. The owner of Bellamy's, Darren Crawford, stood silently by the window, examining the vineyard view that had made our restaurant famous. 27 years he'd owned this place, and in 17 of those years, I'd been his head chef. "We need to discuss some changes," Martin continued, his voice unnaturally formal. "Darren's nephew, Jason, has recently graduated from Le Cordon Bleu, and we've decided it's time for fresh perspectives in the kitchen." I nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. Fresh perspectives. The euphemism hung in the air like an overpowering sauce. "Eleanor, you've been incredible for Bellamy's," Darren finally spoke, still not turning to face me. "Your contributions have been significant. But the industry is changing, and we need to appeal to a younger demographic. We are restructuring the kitchen leadership," Martin added, sliding a folder across the polished desk. "We'd like you to train Jason for the next 2 weeks, then transition to a consulting role. Reduced hours, of course." I smiled politely and opened the folder. Inside was the formal offer: a 40% pay cut, no executive decision-making power, and a requirement to support Jason's vision. All wrapped up in corporate language about valuable experience and mentorship opportunities. "I completely understand," I replied, my voice steady. Relief flashed across Martin's face. "Wonderful. We were hoping you'd see this as an opportunity." Darren finally turned from the window. "Jason has some remarkable ideas for modernizing the menu. Molecular gastronomy, deconstructed classics. He's very excited to work with you during this transition." I nodded again. "When does he start?" "Monday," Martin said. "We'd like you to show him the ropes, introduce him to the suppliers, share your recipes, my recipes. 17 years of perfecting techniques, sourcing rare ingredients, building relationships with local farmers. 17 years of early mornings and late nights, burns and cuts and exhaustion. 17 years of pouring my soul onto plates that had earned Bellamy's its reputation and its coveted Michelin star." "Of course," I said, rising from my chair. "Anything else?" They exchanged a glance, clearly surprised by my composure. They'd expected tears, perhaps. Or anger. They didn't know that I'd seen this coming months ago, when Darren had begun bringing Jason around the kitchen, letting him taste and critique dishes that had been on our menu for years. "That's all for now," Martin said. "Thank you for being so professional about this." I closed the door behind me and walked calmly through the dining room, past the wall of framed reviews that all mentioned my name, past the trophy case holding the awards I'd won for Bellamy's. I entered my kitchen. It was still my kitchen for a few more days, and surveyed the staff preparing for the lunch service. "Everything okay, chef?" asked Diego, my sous chef of 12 years. "Perfectly fine," I replied, tying my apron. "We've got a full house today. Let's make it count." What Martin and Darren didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that their decision had come exactly 1 week after I'd signed the lease on a vacant restaurant space, just 15 minutes from Bellamy's. 3 months after I'd secured investors. 5 months after I'd registered my LLC. For the past year, I'd been quietly preparing. Not because I could predict the future, but because I'd witnessed the pattern at other fine dining establishments. Talented women chefs hitting the invisible ceiling. Younger, less experienced men, often with family connections, being given opportunities they hadn't earned. The slow erasure of contributions made by those who'd built something from nothing. That evening, I made a single phone call. "It's happening," I told Amelia, my lawyer and oldest friend. "They're bringing in Darren's nephew. I'm out in 2 weeks." "Perfect timing," she replied. "The permits came through yesterday. Construction can start next month." "And the investors?" "Solid. especially after that feature in Culinary Quarterly. You being named most innovative chef in the valley didn't hurt. I smiled, looking at the magazine on my kitchen counter. The cover story they'd run about me had been comprehensive. My background, my philosophy, my signature dishes. The journalist had asked where I saw myself in 5 years, and I'd been deliberately vague. Now I was grateful for that caution. Let's accelerate the timeline, I said. I want to open 3 months after I leave Bellamy's. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of deliberate efficiency. Each morning, I arrived at Bellamy's early to document recipes, processes, and supplier information. Not for Jason, but for my own records. I'd created most of these systems over the years, but had never compiled them so methodically. Jason proved to be exactly what I'd expected. Technically skilled, but lacking experience and humility. He talked over my instructions, dismissed techniques I'd spent years perfecting, and made grandiose promises to staff about the changes he'd implement. We'll be doing a completely new menu, he announced during his first team meeting. Modern, experimental, Instagram-worthy food. Diego caught my eye across the kitchen, his expression neutral, but his eyes conveying volumes. He, like most of my senior staff, had already received a discreet email about my future plans. No details, just a request to keep their options open in the coming months. On my final Friday, Darren hosted a small gathering in the dining room. A half-hearted cake, a gift card, and a speech about new chapters that managed to minimize my contributions while emphasizing how excited everyone should be about Jason's vision. Eleanor has been the backbone of Bellamy's kitchen, Darren said, raising a glass of champagne. But now it's time for evolution. I smiled politely throughout, accepted the envelope containing my final paycheck, and thanked them for the opportunity. No one seemed to notice that I hadn't agreed to the consulting role they'd offered. No one asked about my plans. As I walked to my car for the last time, Diego followed me to the parking lot. 3 months? He asked quietly. Perhaps sooner, I replied. Keep your phone on. The transformation began immediately. By Monday morning, I was meeting with my architect and contractor at the new space. A beautiful historic building with high ceilings and large windows overlooking the river. By Wednesday, I was finalizing the business plan with my investors, all of whom had dined at Bellamy's, and recognized that its success had been largely due to my menu and management. The non-compete in your contract? Asked Mr. Winters, my primary backer. Doesn't exist, Amelia replied confidently. We reviewed her employment agreement thoroughly. They never included one. 1 month after my departure from Bellamy's, construction was well underway on what would become Eleanor's. I'd chosen the name deliberately. No hiding, no clever wordplay. I wanted everyone to know exactly whose restaurant this was. Meanwhile, I was hearing troubling reports from former colleagues who remained at Bellamy's. Jason had implemented his new menu immediately. Complex creations focused more on presentation than flavor. He'd alienated several key suppliers by demanding different terms. Reservations once booked 3 months in advance were becoming easier to secure. He fired Carmen yesterday, Diego texted one evening, referring to our pastry chef of 8 years. Is she interested in a new opportunity? I replied. 2 days later, Carmen became my first official hire. 3 months after leaving Bellamy's, I had assembled nearly half of my former kitchen staff. Not because I'd actively poached them, but because Jason had systematically replaced them with his own culinary school connections. Each departure from Bellamy's was followed by a discreet inquiry about joining Eleanor's. Most accepted immediately. The restaurant industry in our small valley operated like a village. Rumors spread quickly. Soon, local food bloggers began speculating about my new venture. I gave no interviews, issued no statements. I wanted the anticipation to build naturally. 4 months after my departure, the first public mention of trouble at Bellamy's appeared in the local newspaper. Valley's premier restaurant experiencing transitional period, read the headline, followed by quotes from Darren about evolving to meet contemporary tastes. No mention was made of declining reservations or customer complaints about the new menu. 5 months in, my contractor handed me the keys to a fully renovated restaurant space. The kitchen was state-of-the-art, designed to my exact specifications. The dining room was elegant but comfortable, with elements that paid subtle homage to the regional cuisine I'd become known for. We began intensive training with the staff, perfecting a menu that showcased my philosophy. Extraordinary food made from exceptional local ingredients, prepared with technical precision but without pretension. 6 months to the day after I'd left, Bellamy's Eleanor's opened its doors with no formal announcement, just a simple open sign and a reservation book that had mysteriously filled up weeks in advance. On our opening night, I stood in the kitchen, watching as my team moved with practiced coordination. Diego expertly managed the line. Carmen's desserts emerged from the pastry station like edible art. The front-of-house staff, led by Mia, formerly Bellamy's most requested server, guided guests through an experience that felt both novel and familiar. Midway through service, Mia approached me with an uncharacteristic hesitation. "Chef," she said quietly, "table 7. I glanced through the kitchen window to see Darren and Martin seated in the center of the dining room, examining their menus with obvious discomfort. I nodded calmly. "Serve them exactly as you would any other guests," I instructed. "No special treatment, positive or negative." They ordered our tasting menu, and I personally inspected each dish before it left the kitchen. Not because I didn't trust my team, but because I wanted to ensure absolute perfection. They needed to understand exactly what they had discarded. At the end of their meal, I finally emerged from the kitchen. The dining room fell momentarily silent. Many of our guests were Bellamy's regulars who recognized me immediately. "Gentlemen," I said, approaching their table. "I trust everything." "Was satisfactory?" Darren looked up at me, his expression a complex mixture of emotions. "Eleanor, this is quite an achievement." "Thank you," I replied simply. "The duck dish," Martin said, unable to maintain his professional distance. "It's similar to what we had at Bellamy's, but somehow better." "I've refined the technique," I acknowledged. "I'm always improving." Darren cleared his throat. "We didn't know you were planning this. You never asked." An uncomfortable silence followed as the implications settled between us. Their restaurant was struggling, mine was flourishing. They had discarded what I had now reclaimed. My talent, my vision, my rightful place. "Is Jason aware you've opened your own place?" Darren finally asked. "I believe so," I replied. "He's made several reservation attempts under different names. We're fully booked for the next 3 months, but we keep a wait list." Martin winced visibly. "I should return to the kitchen," I said. "Thank you for dining with us tonight." As I walked away, I heard Darren call my name. I turned. "The staff," he said, gesturing around the restaurant. "Half of them worked for us." "They work with me," I corrected gently. "There's a difference." 1 month after opening, Eleanor's received a glowing review in the regional newspaper. 2 months. In Culinary Quarterly featured us as one of the most promising new restaurants in America. By the 3rd month, we had expanded our hours to accommodate the demand. Meanwhile, Bellamy's was floundering. Jason's experimental menu had failed to attract the younger demographic Darren had coveted. Regular customers, disappointed by the changes and the departure of familiar staff, were not returning. A scathing review in the same newspaper that had praised Eleanor's used the phrase "Emperor's new clothes" to describe Jason's deconstructed classics. 6 months after our opening, I received an unexpected email from Darren. "Eleanor, I hope this message finds you well. I'm reaching out to explore potential collaboration opportunities. Bellamy's is considering some strategic changes, and your expertise would be invaluable. Would you be open to a conversation?" I showed the email to Diego and Carmen during our morning prep meeting. "They want you back," Diego said, slicing mushrooms with practiced precision. "They need you back," Carmen corrected, not looking up from the delicate sugarwork she was creating. I considered the situation carefully. Bellamy's was a beautiful property, with an excellent location and a storied history. Under different leadership, it could thrive again. But not as a competitor to Eleanor's, as something complementary. My response to Darren was brief and professional. I'm open to discussing mutually beneficial arrangements. Let's meet next week. When we finally sat down, at Eleanor's, not Bellamy's, Darren looked exhausted. The past year had aged him visibly. Jason left, he said without preamble. Took a position in Los Angeles. Said the local clientele didn't understand his vision. I nodded, unsurprised. Bellamy's is in trouble, he continued. Serious trouble. We've lost our Michelin star. Reservations are down 70%. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I had spent 17 years of my life in that kitchen. I had memories there. I was wrong, Darren admitted, the words clearly difficult for him. About Jason, about the direction, about you. I waited, saying nothing. I'm not asking you to come back, he clarified quickly. That would be... I understand that's not possible, but I am open to suggestions, consulting, partnership, even... He hesitated. Even selling Bellamy's. This was more than I had anticipated. Ownership of Bellamy's had been Darren's identity for nearly 3 decades. I don't want to buy Bellamy's, I said carefully, but I may have another solution. 2 weeks later, after intense negotiations and due diligence, the announcement was made. Bellamy's would be transformed into Harvest Hall, a culinary collective featuring multiple dining concepts under one roof. Eleanor's would remain independent, but I would consult on the development of Harvest Hall, which would showcase emerging chefs from underrepresented backgrounds in the culinary world. The press coverage was immediate and enthusiastic. Culinary, visionary Eleanor James reinvents historic restaurant space, read the headlines. The story of my departure from Bellamy's and subsequent success with Eleanor's became public knowledge, carefully framed not as revenge, but as evolution and innovation. 1. Year to the day after I had opened Eleanor's, we received our own Michelin star. The ceremony was held in San Francisco, and my entire team attended. As I accepted the award, I looked out at the audience and saw faces that reflected the journey. Diego and Carmen beaming with pride, Amelia giving me a subtle thumbs up, even Darren, seated in the back, offering a respectful nod. This star belongs to many hands and hearts, I said in my brief acceptance speech, to the team that believed in a vision, to the farmers who grow our ingredients, to the community that supports us, and to those who create space for new beginnings, whether they intend to or not. The laughter was gentle, knowing, that evening, as we celebrated at a renowned San Francisco restaurant, I received a text message from an unknown number. It was a photo of the Michelin Guide open to the page featuring Eleanor's, with a simple message, "Congratulations, well deserved." Jason, I showed it to Diego, who raised an eyebrow. Humble pie? Perhaps, I replied. Or perhaps just recognition. 2 years after opening Eleanor's, I stood in the gleaming kitchen before the morning shift, watching as my team prepared for another day of excellence. Harvest Hall was thriving under the new model, showcasing 3 promising chefs who might otherwise never have had the opportunity to develop their own concepts. I split my time between Eleanor's and my consulting role there, finding unexpected satisfaction in mentoring others. The local culinary landscape had been transformed, not through vengeance but through vision. I hadn't destroyed Bellamy's but had helped create something new and necessary in its place. My name was now permanently attached to my work, exactly where it belonged. As I tied on my apron, I caught sight of the framed article on my office wall, the first major review of Eleanor's, which had concluded with words I read every morning. In Eleanor's kitchen, experience isn't just respected, it's celebrated. The result isn't just a meal, but a masterclass in knowing your worth and serving. it with impeccable timing. Timing, after all, had been everything.